Joseph Herriman was an American cartoonist best known for the comic strip Krazy Kat. More influential than popular, Krazy Kat had an appreciative audience among those in the arts. Gilbert Seldes' article, "The Krazy Kat Who Walks by Himself," was the earliest example of a critic from the high arts giving serious attention to a comic strip. The Comics Journal placed the strip first on its list of the greatest comics of the 20th century. Herriman's work has been a primary influence on cartoonists such as Will Eisner, Charles M. Schulz, Robert Crumb, Art Spiegelman, Bill Watterson, and Chris Ware. Herriman was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, to mulatto Creole parents, and grew up in Los Angeles. After he graduated from high school in 1897, he worked in the newspaper industry as an illustrator and engraver. He moved on to cartooning and comic strips, a medium then in its infancy, and drew a variety of strips until he introduced his most famous character, Krazy Kat, in his strip The Dingbat Family in 1910. A Krazy Kat daily strip began in 1913, and from 1916 the strip also appeared on Sundays. It was noted for its poetic, dialect-heavy dialogue, its fantastic, shifting backgrounds, and its bold, experimental page layouts. In the strip's main motif, Ignat's mouse pelted Krazy with bricks, which the naive, androgynous cat interpreted as symbols of love. As the strip progressed, a love triangle developed between Krazy, Ignatz, and Officer Pup. Herriman lived most of his life in Los Angeles, but made frequent trips to the Navajo deserts in the southwestern U.S. He was drawn to the landscapes of Monument Valley and the Enchanted Mesa, and made Coconino County the location of his Krazy Kat strips. His artwork made much use of Navajo and Mexican themes and motifs against shifting desert backgrounds. He was a prolific cartoonist who produced a large number of strips and illustrated Don Marquis's books of poetry about Aki and Mephitable, an alley cat and a cockroach. Newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst was a proponent of Herriman and gave him a lifetime contract with King Features Syndicate, which guaranteed Herriman a comfortable living and an outlet for his work despite its lack of popularity. Personal history. Early life. Joseph Herriman was born at 348 Villa Street in New Orleans on August 22, 1880. He came from a line of French-speaking Louisiana Creole mulattoes who were considered free people of color, and were reportedly active in the early abolitionist movement. His paternal grandfather, George Herriman Sr., owned a tailor shop on Royal Street in New Orleans. His maternal grandmother was born in Havana, Cuba. His parents were George Herriman, Jr., born in New Orleans, and Clara Morel Herriman, born in Iberville. The family attended the St. Augustine Catholic Church in New Orleans' Treme neighborhood. When he was 10, Herriman and his family moved to Los Angeles, where he grew up south of downtown near Main Street and Washington Boulevard. His father worked there as a tailor and, for a time, as a baker. Herriman attended the Catholic boys' school St. Vincent's School on Figueroa. He worked as a barber and later as a baker with his father while in school, though he pined for the opportunity to make art. Soon after graduating in 1897, he sold a sketch of the Hotel Petrolia in Santa Paula to the Los Angeles Herald. This landed him a $2 per week job there as an assistant in the engraving department, where he occasionally did drawings for advertisements and political cartoons. Early career in New York. When he was 20, Herriman sneaked aboard a freight train bound for New York City, hoping his chances as an artist would be better there. He was unsuccessful at first, and survived by working as a barker and billboard painter at Coney Island, until one of the leading humor magazines of the day, Judge, accepted some of his cartoons. Between June 15 and October 26, 1901, 11 of his cartoons appeared in that magazine's page pages, in the heavily cross-hatched style of the day. He often used sequential images in his cartoons, as in the emerging comic strip medium. On September 29 that year, his first real comic strips were published, one in the Pulitzer chain of newspapers on a non-contractual, one-shot basis and another on a continuing basis in the Philadelphia North American Syndicate's first comic strip supplement. His first color comic strips appeared in the T.C. McClure Syndicate beginning October 20. His success with these syndicated strips convinced Herriman to give up on magazine submissions for the Pulitzer papers on February 16, 1902. He began his first strip that he had a continuing character, Musical Mose. The strip featured an African-American musician who impersonated other ethnicities, only to suffer the consequences when discovered by his audience. Professor Otto and his auto, about a terrifyingly dangerous driver, followed in March, and Acrobatic Archie, a kid strip with a child protagonist, first appeared in April. With his future as a cartoonist seemingly assured, Herriman traveled back to Los Angeles to marry his childhood sweetheart and returned with her to New York. In the November 1902 issue of the literary magazine The Bookman, Herriman wrote of his profession self-deprecatingly, while poet Ladouche Hancock, in an article in that issue titled The American Comic and Caricature Art, wrote, "Art and poetry is the characteristic of George Herriman. Were his drawings not so well known, one would think he had mistaken his vocation." Herriman's work was increasing in popularity, and he occasionally had front-page, full-color strips for the Pulitzer supplements, such as Two Jolly Jackies about two unemployed sailors, which began in January 1903. He began drawing the cowboy strip Lariat Pete in September for the McClure Syndicate after Two Jolly Jackies was ended. In June, Herriman was employed by the New York World. There, he illustrated Roy McArdle's commentaries on local events, beginning June 28 and running to the year's end. Herriman still produced syndicate work, such as Major Ozone's Fresh Air Crusade for the World Color Printing Company beginning January 2, 1904. Another of Herriman's obsessive characters, the Major traveled the world in an unsuccessful search from the purest air and spouted poetic dialogue. Major Ozone was so popular that it soon was given the supplement's front page. The same month, Herriman moved from the World to the New York Daily News, where he was given a larger quantity and variety of work, including cartoon reporting on sports and politics. In February and March, he had a short-lived continuing character comic strip about domestic life called Home Sweet Home. That spring, he began illustrating a series of articles written by Walter Murphy called Bubble Spikers. Rudolph Bloch hired Herriman for the Hearst papers with a salary commensurate with his talents, starting April 22 at the New York American, which ran no daily comic strips at the time. Herriman drew sports cartoons in an office alongside Frederick Burropper, James Swinnerton, and Tad Dorgan, who was popularly known as Tad, and was considered a star at another Hearst paper, the New York Evening Journal. Tad and Herriman were often assigned to cover the same sporting events and became close friends. In 1924, Tad called Herriman one of the best sporting artists in the world, and regretted that Herriman no longer did that kind of work. Herriman continued with Hearst until June 1905, when he left the paper, possibly because of the new sports editor's unsympathetic attitude to cartoonists. He returned to Los Angeles in the latter half of 1905. Returned to California. In California, Herriman continued to mail in work to the World Color Printing Company. He revived Major Ozone and produced Grandma's Girl, likewise Bud Smith, which he combined from two earlier strips, and a two-tier children's strip, Rosie Posey, Mama's Girl. He began to work with the Los Angeles Times on January 8, 1906, before returning to Hearst that summer, accompanying a front-page illustration in Hearst's Los Angeles Examiner. Herriman was announced as the Examiner's cartoonist on August 21. His artwork began to appear on nearly every page, resulting in greatly increased sales for the newspaper. In October, he stopped working for World Color, following the success of Bud Fisher's daily strip.A, Mutt, which debuted in late 1907. Herriman began a similarly sports-themed daily strip that December called Mr. Prunes the Plumber. The strip was not as successful as Fisher's, and it ceased to appear after December 26. His next comic strip, Baron Mooch, starring the titular freeloader, debuted in the Examiner on October 12, 1909. Herriman began two more strips in November 1909 with the World Color Printing Company, Alexander the Cat and Daniel and Pansy, which both appeared in color. Daniel and Pansy was Herriman's first strip to feature an all-animal cast. This was followed in the Examiner on December 20 by the short-lived Mary's Home from College, a precursor to the girl strips such as Cliff Sterritt's Polly and Her Pals and John Held Jr.'s Merely Margie, and on December 23 by Gooseberry Sprigg, about an aristocratic, cigar-smoking duck who had previously and popularly appeared in Herriman's sports cartoons. The bird-populated fantasy was a precursor to Krazy Kat, and many of its characters reappeared in the later strip, New York Again, and Krazy Kat in 1910. The sports editor of the New York Evening Journal called Herriman back to New York to cover for Tad Dorgan, who was in San Francisco covering the fight of the century between Jack Johnson and Jim Jeffries. 6 days after arriving in New York, Herriman began The Dingbat Family, starring E. Pluribus Dingbat and his family. Herriman used typed lettering on the strip on July 26, 1910, but quickly went back to hand lettering. On August 10, 1910, Herriman retitled the strip The Family Upstairs, making it perhaps the first comic strip in which the title characters never appeared. The original title returned after the strip of November 15, 1911, when the Dingbats building was demolished to make room for a department store and their upstairs nemesis parted paths. Critics do not regard the strip highly, but it provided the vehicle for a fruitful situation. In the July 26 episode, a mouse threw a brick at the family cat, called Cat, which hit the cat on the head. The antics of this mouse and cat continued to appear in the bottom portion of the Dingbat Family. Herriman said he did this to fill up the waste space. About a month after its first appearance, the cat crept up on the sleeping mouse and kissed it loudly. The mouse awoke saying, "I dreamed an angel kissed me," while the cat crept away and said, "Sweet thing." The gender of cat was unclear from the start. Herriman experimented with a decision about the character's gender, but it remained ambiguous and he would refer to cat as he or she as he saw fit. Herriman incorporated unusual details into the mini-strip's backgrounds, cacti, pagodas, fanciful vegetation, or anything else that struck his fancy. This became a signature of the later Krazy Kat strip. The cast grew and soon included the mainstay character Bullpup and characters from the Gooseberry Sprigg strip. The strip's characters, relations and situations grew organically during its lifetime, encouraged by Herriman's colleagues. The cat and mouse substrip was gaining in popularity, instead of filling up space in the bottom of the Dingbat Family's panels. It began to occupy a tier of panels of its own. In July 1912, while Herriman had the Dingbats on vacation, Krazy Kat and Ignatz Mouse took over the strip, which was retitled Krazy Kat and I, Mouse for the duration. On October 28, 1913, Krazy Kat debuted as an independent strip on the Daily Comics page. During the first few years of publication, Krazy Kat's humor changed from slapstick to a more vaudevillian kind. The shifting backgrounds became increasingly bizarre, presaging things to come. The strip expanded to a full-page black and white Sunday strip on April 23, 1916. Herriman made full use of his imagination and used the whole page in the strip's layout. The strips were unlike anything else on the comics page, spontaneous, formally daring, yet impeccably composed. Herriman visited Monument Valley in Arizona and similar places in New Mexico and southern Utah, and incorporated the distinct forms of the desert landscape into his strips. The enchanted mesa of New Mexico first appeared in Krazy Kat in the summer of 1916. Herriman may have visited after reading an article by Theodore Roosevelt in 1913, but he may have gone earlier. The desert Coconino County, Arizona, that became the backdrop to Krazy Kat was first mentioned in a 1911 Dingbat family strip, though the real Coconino County was located further southwest than Herriman's fanciful version. The Dingbat family finished in 1916 and was replaced by Baron Bean's debut the next day. The strip's title character, the Baron, was an impoverished English nobleman, a tramp inspired by Charles Dickens and Charlie Chaplin. He and his valet Grimes would plot ways to get by. Herriman later introduced the main characters' wives, and after a run as a domestic strip, with occasional appearances of characters from Krazy Kat's world, it ended in January 1919. It was replaced the next day by Now Listen Mabel, which was about a young man courting a young woman. He would be caught in a compromising situation, which he would try to explain away with Now Listen Mabel. The strip lasted until the December. Krazy Kat gained an appreciative audience in the world of the arts. The character debuted in film in 1916. The first animated films starring a cat were produced by Hearst's International Film Service, though without Herriman's direct involvement. In 1922, Adolph Boehm choreographed a jazz pantomime Krazy Kat ballet written by John Alden Carpenter. It was first performed in New York in 1922 by Ballet in Time, and Herriman illustrated the libretto and designed the costumes and scenario. While it was not a great success, the critics deemed Taylor, Stark Young and Henrietta Strauss wrote favorably about it. The strip itself was the subject of an article by literary critic Gilbert Seldes called Golla the Comic Strip's Art, which appeared in the May 1922 issue of Vanity Fair. Seldes expanded this article as part of his book on the popular arts, The Seven Lively Arts, in which Seldes argued against conservative tendencies that excluded artists in the popular arts, such as Herriman and Chaplin, from being considered alongside traditional artists. Krazy Kat was the subject of a chapter entitled The Krazy Kat That Walks by Himself, which is the most famous piece of writing about the strip and the earliest example of a critic from the world of high art giving legitimacy to the comic strip medium. Vanity Fair inducted Herriman into its Hall of Fame in the April 1923 issue. California again. Later career and death. Hearst, an admirer of Krazy Kat, had given Herriman a lifetime contract with his company King Features Syndicate, which gave Herriman the security to live anywhere he wanted. In 1922, he moved back to Hollywood, into a two-story Spanish-style home at 1617 North Sierra Bonita, from where he made frequent visits to the Arizona desert. Herriman developed ties with members of the film industry. He knew Hal Roach studio members Tom McNamara and Beanie Walker from the newspaper days. Walker, Herriman's best friend, was the head writer on the Our Gang shorts. In the early 1920s, Herriman occasionally drew his strips at the Roach studio. He met celebrities, including Will Rogers and Frank Capra, and presented them with hand-colored drawings. He loved Charlie Chaplin's films, and reviewed The Gold Rush in the magazine Motion Picture Classics in October 1925. Autumn 1922 saw the first daily installment of Stumble In, the first non-Krazy Kat strip Herriman had drawn since 1919. A verbose strip whose Sundays were often overrun with prose. Its lead characters were Uriah and Ida Stumble, who rented rooms to an assortment of strange characters. The daily strip was short-lived, but the Sundays edition lasted 3 years, from August 1925 until September 1929. King Features required that Herriman design the Krazy Kat Sundays so that they could be run either as a full Sunday page or as 2 4-panel dailies. Herriman lamented intrusion on his page designs, and the artwork of the period took on a rushed look. He was made to focus on the strip's characterization, and during this period, a Krazy Ignatz off is a puppy love triangle for which the strip is remembered became fully developed. Pup pined for Krazy, Krazy loved Ignatz, and Ignatz hated Krazy and pelted the annoying Kat with a brick, and Pup imprisoned Ignatz. Throughout the late 1920s, Herriman made frequent trips to Cainta, Arizona, in Navajo country, about 25 miles from Monument Valley. He also made winter trips to Mexico. The desert Navajo artwork, a Mexican pottery and architecture became more prominent in Herriman's strips, and he sometimes used Spanish vocabulary in the dialogue. Herriman did little work on these excursions, and it is likely that he drew his strips in hurried bursts when in Hollywood. Stumble In finished in late 1925, and it was replaced with the domestic strip As Husbands, which ran until the end of that year. In 1928, Herriman took over the strip Embarrassing Moments, which had begun in 1922 and had been drawn by several cartoonists. The strip eventually became Bernie Burns, in which embarrassing moments would happen to the title character. The strip appeared in few papers, and after it ended in 1932, Herriman worked only on Krazy Kat, although he provided illustrations for Don Marquis' popular Archean Table, a series of books of poetry about a cat and a cockroach. In 1930, Herriman sold his first Hollywood home to a friend and moved his family to 2217 Maravilla Drive, a Spanish-style mansion atop a hill. It was adorned with paintings of Southwest and native themes, and had a Mexican-style garden paved with flagstones and decorated with painted pots and tropical plants. Herriman later bought the lot across the street and turned it into a public park. The 1930s were a period of tragedy for Herriman. On September 29, 1931, his wife Mabel died after an automobile accident, and in 1939, his youngest daughter Bobby died unexpectedly at 30. After his wife's death, Herriman never remarried and lived in Los Angeles with his cats and dogs. He developed a close relationship with cartoonist James Swinnerton's first wife Louise, with whom he frequently exchanged letters. Herriman underwent a kidney operation in spring 1938, and during his 10-week convalescence King Features rare and old Krazy Kat strips. Krazy Kat's popularity fell considerably over the years, and by the 1930s it was running in only 35 newspapers, while its contemporaries such as Bringing Up Father were reportedly running in up to 1,000. Herriman realized his $750 per week salary from Hearst's King Features syndicate was far more than the revenue the strip could be generating, but Hearst refused Herriman's offer to take a pay cut. Hearst let it be known that Herriman was to continue the strip as long as he liked. From 1935, Krazy Kat appeared in color, of which Herriman made bold use. He reduced the amount of hatchwork and used larger, more open panels. Herriman died in his sleep in his home near Hollywood on April 25, 1944, after a long illness. An incompletely inked penciling of a week's worth of daily strips was found on his drawing board. On his death certificate, the cause of death was listed as non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver, and despite his mixed-race heritage, he was listed as Caucasian. The New York Journal-American ran a front-page obituary. His funeral at Little Church of Flowers at Forest Lawn Memorial Park was attended by few. Cartoonist Harry Hirschfield spoke at the funeral, saying, "If ever there was a saint on earth, it was George Herriman." According to his request, his body was cremated and his remains were scattered over Monument Valley. On June 25, 1944, 2 months after Herriman's death, the last of his completed Krazy Kat strips, a full-page Sunday, was printed. At the time, Hearst usually engaged new cartoonists when the artists of popular strips quit or died, but he made an exception for Herriman, as he felt that no one could take his place. Personal life. Herriman was described as self-deprecatingly modest, and he disliked being photographed. The New York Journal-American's obituary described him as a devoted husband and father, of slight build, mild-mannered and an anonymous contributor to charities. He was generous to his friends, and sold his first Hollywood house, which he had bought for $50,000, to a friend for $40,000. Though a private person, he was said to be an entertaining host to his friends. He would sometimes stay silent during social occasions and would often leave the room to wash dishes, which he said he enjoyed as it gave him the opportunity to think. His favorite game was poker, which he particularly enjoyed playing with his fellow cartoonists. Herriman had a great love of animals, and had a large number of dogs and cats. He had 5 dogs and 13 cats in 1934. He usually kept to a vegetarian diet, except when it made him feel too weak, and he refused to ride horses. He so admired Henry Ford's pacifist stance that he would only buy Ford automobiles. He purchased a new model annually. Herriman married his childhood sweetheart Mabel Lillian Bridge in Los Angeles on July 7, 1902. They had 2 daughters, Mabel, nicknamed Toodles, later Toods, and Barbara, who had epilepsy. His only child Dinah was born to Bobby and her husband, author scriptwriter Ernest Pascal.